All right, looks like we're live. Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we are talking to Sam Mameli. Sam Mameli is a fantasy illustrator who's worked in a lot of different OSR books. He's currently working on his own Kickstarter, and he's also illustrating my Kickstarter. I'll put links to both of those things down in the description below. How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So I figured I'd talk a little bit about what it's like being a fantasy illustrator. You seem to be becoming more popular in the OSR in particular, in terms of more and more people getting you to work on their books like Old School Essentials and Troika and so on. So how did you get into doing that?
Well, I got into D&D in college. The week that fourth edition launched, a friend of mine was going to start doing a campaign and suggested that I play in it. And that was my first time. And then from there, I sort of caught the bug and just started playing a bunch. And then I think sometime like my senior year of college, 2012-ish, I found the Google Plus scene and I lurked there for the most of the time.
Yeah.
And then when Google Plus died and Twitter started becoming sort of I'd say like the main place for people that were coming over from there that wanted to at least like go bigger as opposed to sort of make a lateral move to another small platform. I started promoting myself a lot more and just started I don't know, I just sort of got over what I've come to think of as like there's a time in every artist's career when you think you're annoying by being on social media because you have to
Yeah.
post so much in order to get through like all the weird like algorithm stuff. And once I realized that I wasn't being annoying, people were just actually seeing my stuff. It was a lot easier, and that's when people started, hitting me up for art. And I also did a fair amount of I just made it very obvious that I wanted to do work and that I really liked, games and everything like that.
Yeah, and you have like a really distinct style that stood out, I think, especially within the OSR, which tended to do more like black and white, kind of gritty, grim dark, whereas your stuff tends to be more colorful and maybe a little bit more cartoony, and it had a kind of a vibrancy to it that I think really stood apart.
Yeah, I like to think of myself as coming from more of like an Errol Otis place.
Mm,
In terms of like OSR art or like old school art. Cause like, it's so weird because like I think of myself as sort of like OSR adjacent because I didn't work for story gaming people. I do work for, I take a very Michael Caine approach. Like if you send me a message, I'll probably work for you, like assuming I have the time and like, the money is all right and everything. But like a lot of the early stuff that I really was attracted to is like, do you know who Tom Wham is? He did like the very first Beholder sketch,
okay.
and like
Yeah.
and like all the old dungeon cartoons that are very like comic panely, where it's just like four goofy adventurers like, the treasure chest is eating my friend. Oh no! Like
Yeah.
it's all very silly, which is something I really like. And like a combination of that and like a lot of like old Nintendo manuals. That was my like game inspiration for the most part, like
Yeah,
growing
I
up.
feel like a lot of the characters and scenes that you draw sort of capture what it feels like to play D&D at the table, whereas a lot of D&D illustrations are kind of aspirational, where it's like you will feel like this, but oftentimes you're just, a bunch of weirdos and then a thing is eating your friend and you're trying to pull him out of his mouth, and that's what the actual game is like.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, and that's the most fun that's whenever I have the most like that's the most fun I have playing D&D is that kind of stuff. Like,
yeah. Was there who was the first person that you did art for in an RPG sense?
so that would be Gabe Soria, who he's a writer for comic books. He's done a lot of stuff. I think his most notable recent work is Murder Ballads.
Hmm.
But he's done work. He did the Sword and Backpack RPG.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So we found each other on Tumblr back in like 2013, I want to say, and I did like some fan art for Sword and Backpacks. I found it and I thought it was amazing. And then from there, we just started sort of collaborating on stuff. He sent me like my first like prompt for something. He's like, I think this game really needs like a logo. Do you want to like work on something for that? And he's just like, just imagine like sort of like the Dead Kennedys, but like also D&D. And I was like, that sounds amazing. Like we got to do that. So he's definitely the one that got me into doing this professionally in any sense. That was sort of my first real job. And I think the first like published book that I did was the Ruinous Palace of the Metagorgos, which was a In Search of Games, which I mean Evie Lockhart was and Chris Manell were the sort of the writers on that, and then we are working together again on Permian Nations, so that's pretty cool. I love Evie's stuff.
That's right. So that's another Zine Quest. No, that's not Zine Quest. It's just going on at the same time.
It was sort of just before Zine Quest. That's just Troika stuff. So it's all Melsonia.
So if you have, you were doing art before you were doing D&D art though, right?
Yeah, it's funny because I mean I went to school for art. Like I studied printmaking and graphic design and sound art and a little bit of sculpture and ceramics, and I went to a multidisciplinary art school. So, and I've been sort of drawing forever, but this to me felt like the most natural conclusion to like all of my interests sort of folding into one thing, and like started out as a hobby and then sort of turned into a job. So it feels very natural.
Right.
Do this kind of work.
I mean, and going through your portfolio on your website, Better Legends, it's interesting because there is like a really wide variety, a wide variety of different styles. You don't just have like your one D&D thing. There's like figure art and there's like much more abstract, like collage like stuff going on at the same time, which is really neat.
Yeah. I mean, I think of art style, like from an illustration standpoint, like I went to school for fine art, which is, it's weird to like make any distinction at all between art in my mind now, but like when you're in school for fine art, like illustration is like sort of like this weird sort of derogatory term sometimes that gets used for your stuff, like, oh, this is very illustrative, and you're like, thanks, you might as well have just punched me in the stomach.
Yeah.
But I think of it now, like I think of like collecting art styles sort of like collecting kung fu styles or something like that. It's just I learned how to do this a different way that just opens more doors. I can address different projects. I can, set different tones. Like it's fun to step outside of what I think of as like my sort of usual comfort zone style. And I mean, a big part of that too was making the switch from drawing traditionally, like in a book, to on a Wacom tablet. And that changes your style. Like I'm pretty sure everyone that's made that switch sort of knows that feeling where it's like everything gets rounder for a little while. And so it's different, but I don't know. I like it. I like mixing things up, and I get bored really easily. So it's nice to change pace sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel like there's a particular path that people should follow if they want to get into doing D&D art that you would advise people to do if they wanted to go that route? Or is it just put your stuff out there and just start using social media?
I think putting yourself out there and using social media is the best advice I could give to any artist that wants to gain any sort of following or showcase their work. Like you have to have an Instagram. Twitter, I don't necessarily recommend everybody do Twitter because it can hurt you in like an emotional way.
That's true.
It's PvP enabled there.
Yeah.
But I mean, at least for me, like the way I really got my start doing stuff, like apart from I did some work with Gabe and that was cool, but like I was doing these sort of custom character sheets for people. So they'd like pitch me their character and I would do like a commemorative character sheet almost where I'd have all the stats and everything like that. And so I got to play around with like graphic design for various things. And then, have a character on top of that. And it's just like sort of weird art object of, somebody's, 5th or 6th level character or something. Cause, and especially like an old school game, like people get really proud of that kind of stuff. Cause it's like, I survived like all this crap. And like, I want to commemorate my weirdo, which I really like. It's a way that, I mean, I still do like a lot of personal commission work for people just cause I mean, that to me is, those are the people that they get the most excited about it. Which makes me really happy. Like it feels like I'm giving something to somebody that they really care about and that I'm like, helping somebody like, I don't know, bring something that's in their head out of their head onto a piece of paper, and everybody always gets really excited, and that makes me feel good. So, but
Yeah.
in terms of where you would just post everything, and you, and like not just your own stuff too, like find other people that are in the same sort of space as you. And this is sort of general, like I think content creation, anything like that on the internet. You have to find people that are sort of on the same rung of the ladder. It's like a phrase is called like reaching across the ladder. So you find people that are in a similar like follower count space, or like are just starting out in like a similar way to you are, or have a similar style, and just like promote them too, because there's no making art in a bubble, and there's no like building a community with one person. You gotta like, I don't know, you gotta reach out to people and they'll reach back usually.
Especially if you can like tap into one particular group. Like the OSR is very prolific, but it's also fairly small. So once you start connecting with a couple people, then suddenly everyone knows who you are. There's like a relatively small stable of people who consistently do OSR art. But then the word will spread quickly.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like you can, yeah, I think and the indie game scene as a whole is so funny and like fractured, but also like weirdly tightly knit for
Mm-hmm.
something that's so fractured. And so like, I mean, I had I've like had meetings with people where halfway through I was talking to them and I'm like, oh yeah, so something like this, like I've done something like this before, and they go, oh, that was you. And I go, yeah, because
Yeah.
I'm really bad. Excuse me, I'm really bad about like signing my work. Sometimes I've gotten better as the years gone on, and I've also changed websites a couple of times. Like back in the day, I was going off of a like my Tumblr, which was Milk in a Jar, and then I switched over to Better Legends.
Mhm.
And on Twitter, I go by Skullboy, and that's like what I use for Twitch streaming. And like sometimes I use my real name for any publications because there's like a weird traditional thing that I feel like, oh yes, I'm Sam Mameli, and like it's very bizarre. I shoot myself in the foot constantly with that kind of thing. I'm getting
Yeah.
slowly better at marketing.
That has happened to me where I'm just like, that guy, what's Skull Boy? Then I'm like, what's his real name again? I've talked to him before, but all I can picture is this little skull. And then I have to like look up Skull Boy and then I figure it out.
That's the one thing I try to keep the same is I use that avatar for everything. So like
Yeah.
if hopefully somebody recognizes that. But I mean I started using Skullboy just because I'm very infatuated with the whole like artist using a fake name. It's like Mobius stuff, and like even and more closer to home in terms of like game art. Grey Wiz is
Okay.
one of my favorite. I mean, Break is going to be amazing. Like
Yeah.
everybody's excited for Break, and Grey Wiz is half of that. But I always thought that was just a cool name, and like they have that same sort of iconic little Grey Wizard avatar. I just like that.
Yeah, it adds an aura of mystery. Like I have no idea what Grey Wiz's real name is, and that's fine. He's just
I
like
don't think
this...
anybody does.
Yeah,
I mean, Ray
yeah.
probably does, but
Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about your Zine Quest project, which is 10 people you meet in the Undergarden?
Yeah, it's a collaborative project. Me and my wife she's writing all of the characters, and I'm doing the art and layout in sort of a collage style, which is something I haven't really brought into games before. It's something that I did a lot in college in printmaking, and we used to make a lot of zines together in college. So this was like a cool sort of like rehashing of old project kind of stuff, but with in a new twist. And I have been doing stuff with Undergarden sort of as like you that stage where you've got like a setting that you're formulating in your head for like, 4 or 5 years before you do anything with it.
Yeah.
It's just always sort of been in the back there. And I've run just a couple of games in various sort of different versions of it, but this is the most recent one. And I really I love her writing, and she's like a songwriter and does a lot of sort of poetry stuff. And I think it's going to be a really cool meshing of our two art styles. And it's just fun to make zines.
So she's doing all the writing, you're doing the art?
Yep.
Cool. So, and it's a Troika thing, right?
It is a Troika thing. Troika, in my mind, is the most natural sort of embodiment of the thing that I thought was coolest about games when I first got into the G+ scene, which was the Flail Snails convention games, where everybody had all their characters that they were bouncing around from world to world. And that's more or less what Troika is, the idea of like this unified like hub in the multiverse. And, every week it's very Doctor Who. You can have like a different, totally different setting, almost like a traveler game or something like that, where you're like, oh, what planet are we on this week? I really like that in terms of being able to switch things up when you want to. And it's just a really clean system. And I mean, I've done a lot of work for Dan and the Melsonia people, and I just like it.
Yeah, I mean, it was only when I started reading the new edition, the Numinous edition of Troika, where it suddenly clicked. I don't know why it didn't before, where it's like, oh, this is Planescape.
Yeah.
And it suddenly slotted together in my head, like the general gist of what was going on. You're like, oh, okay. And now with Zine Quest, we're seeing a couple different Troika spheres, right? So there's yours, someone else is doing like a Celtic mythic one, and then
Yeah.
there's the other one that's not Zine Quest. So there's a bunch of them coming out all at once.
There's a lot of, I mean, there's so many cool Zine Quests right now. It's such a great, just, I mean, I think it's a great project, and it's like total madness, but everybody's really supportive of each other. And there's just so much stuff and so many different takes on Zine, which is cool because it's a lot of people that don't necessarily have like what you would call like the traditional like punk zine background, but are just like, oh yeah, I'm just making the thing. And like, I think earnestly making a thing is what it's at the heart of a really good zine at the end of the day. And that's one of the reasons I think RPG zines are so cool, because I mean, so many of them, you have to be earnest about it, because I mean, we're all just pretending to be elves and having, a good time. So
yeah, and the Zine Quest in particular is so easy to get into because it's so low stakes. So like I've just been going around telling everyone I know this is going on. Zine Quest projects tend to do really well. Just make something. I told my brother last week. My brother's like, I'm gonna make one because I do D&D. I'm like, do it. Just make it 20 pages long. Just make it PDF only if you don't know what you're doing. Make it simple.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's super cool, and just it's a really great introduction to Kickstarter too. I think I did a fair amount. We had done a zine Kickstarter in college for this project that we were doing at the time called Making, which was it's just random art and writing stuff. And we basically did a Kickstarter so we could do lots of absurd different kinds of paper. And we ended up making like a giant zine and like a little tiny one and then like an envelope size one and whatever. But it was a nice sort of reintroduction to the whole process. And there's a lot more understanding of the platform at this point than when we did that. 'Cause I was back in like 2012. So like it was sort of very early, and it felt this very mythical, like, oh, you just put this thing up there and people will give you money, and like, who knows? Yeah. And now there's like a business model for doing a good Kickstarter. And I think this is a great way to like ease yourself into that world without getting in over your head, because you see a lot of people that get in over their head right away. And it's stressful even from like a standing over here perspective.
Yeah. Like keep it small. Don't have any crazy stretch goals. Set the date way out. Give yourself lots of time. Yeah. Go as safe as possible early on. So what's your pitch for 10 people you meet in the Undergarden? What's this thing like?
10 people you meet in the Undergarden is sort of whimsical, sarcastic, fairy tale type stuff. It's like all good. It's like one of King Arthur's knights, like wearing a Walkman. Like it's got a lot of sort of weirdness to it. It's a sort of double love for my infatuation with like crumbling ruins, and also just like really well fleshed out characters that like are all really just like, I like characters that have like a lot of good prompts when you're trying to play them. Like I think that's the number one thing that is missing from a lot of the like really mainstream stuff, is they're like, oh, this is a dwarf, and he drinks because he's a dwarf, hurdy-dirty-dur, and it's just like, okay, that's fine, and it's cool. But in like all the stuff that has made me like those adventures has been people that take those characters and twist them in some way, or make them just a little bit more charismatic. And so like it's meant to be sort of poetic, weird, charismatic characters in a sort of crumbling underworld.
So it's all set underground. The setting is just...
It's my thought with it is that it's sort of, everybody acknowledges that it's underground, but nobody's really checked.
Okay.
The idea is it's beyond the copper door is the sort of idea, and it's like like a lot of thick tree cover that you can't quite see past.
Okay.
I've run it in a couple of different ways. I ran it once as it starts in a very sort of Diablo 1, like, single, like there's a a door in the chapel that you go down and that takes you into the underworld, but
Mm-hmm.
everybody up top is kind of weird too. And I've also run it just as like you are, a school, like a school child that takes a nap and wakes up and you don't know what your name is anymore, kind of thing. So it's sort of Narnia inspired without all the religious overtones.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Are people going to need to actually own Troika to play it?
No.
No.
No, I mean
Okay.
I'm doing the Troika stats for it just because they're so easy, and I like the idea of the six the mine the six flavors of how somebody's feeling at the time kind of thing.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah.
it's also just like it's very system agnostic. Every time Carrie and I play games together, we don't run with a system or anything like that. We just spitball it back and forth, and
Yeah.
it's always worked out, which is I think a really fun exercise to do. And if you're into improv or anything like that, it's just a cool way to play sometimes, just to say like we're gonna yes and each other for a while and see what happens.
Yeah.
And
That's been my experience running games with kids in particular, because I basically use my fifth grade students. I have an after school club where I do D&D, and we sort of have a system, but not really. And I will change the system pretty dramatically from week to week because I'll just try out new things. No one seems to really care or barely even notice most of the time. And it
yeah,
works just fine. Yeah.
because it's just a means to an end. It's you
Yeah.
say I want to do this, and however you make the math for that work out, it's like whatever. Like as long as
Yeah.
I still swing my sword, as long as I still jump across the hole, like. Fifth graders is a really good age demographic, I think, for that kind of imaginative stuff. I bet that's really fun.
Yeah, it
Like I
is.
wouldn't want to play with older or younger kids, I think, but I think fifth grade's the
Yeah.
sweet spot.
It's funny because like I'm doing this with another teacher who's like next door to me, and he's doing the sixth graders, totally different dynamic,
Oh, I
where
bet.
it's just like they want to just murder everything. And he's like, I can't get them to stop dying because they keep like finding bottomless holes and jumping into them. And like then they lose all their levels, they have to start over. I'm like, my fifth graders are trying to survive. What's going on? I don't know what it is.
That's really interesting. I think there is some, I mean, everybody I feel like everybody when they first play D&D, they play, some kind of tropey character, right? You're either like a horny bard or you're a murderous rogue or something like that, and you have to get that out of your system.
Yeah.
It's like when you first play Grand Theft Auto or something like that. It's like, oh, this is the game where I can murder everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Ah! And I don't know, it's weird because I don't know how much of that is like to blame on systems or societies or people or groups of people specifically. It's just like it's just a weird thing. Like I don't know, everybody responds to you know impromptu storytelling in a different way.
Yeah, it's really weird to see the different age groups react to it. So your inspirations, you said you're really into like Nintendo manuals, because
Oh yeah.
I've seen you do Twitter threads where you just talk about page layout and design, which I always thought was really interesting. So do you want to talk about that at all?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's the number one thing that's missing from most, well, certainly from the mainstream RPG products is just usability. I am a person that I have a really hard time focusing while like reading like a big
Mhm.
piece of text. So I design things very specifically to be heavy on the images and like a lot of like layout stuff to make it easier to catch things. I really like big bold headers and then like uh, having things bold in the middle of text and just like keeping excuse me sorry keeping things short and like mostly visual. Honestly, I'll take a visual list over everything most times. That's a lot of stuff that I used to do that I'm trying to actually get back into now. I have some plans to release some stuff that's like a sort of like a beginner's guide to role-playing games,
Mhm.
and specifically old school ones, from the perspective of like you don't have to read a lot and it's more about picking up on visual cues for things, because I think that's what a lot of people pick up on initially.
Mhm.
And being able to do the stuff you see in the pictures is like what we were talking about earlier. It's I think sometimes there's a disconnect. Sometimes you see an image and you're like, "Oh, that looks awesome," and it's like, "Well, yeah, you're not gonna be able to do that in the game until like level 25 though, or something." And everyone's like,
Right.
"Oh, okay, that
Yeah.
sounds fun.
I think
I
I
guess I'll
saw
kill rats again."
I think I saw like the version of this that you were working on, where it's like a comic strip where you have like a setup of like you can hit things, and this is what it looks like when you do that. And it just struck me as much more like the way that you learn to play these games anyway, right? It's like people pick up 5e D&D, it's this giant fat book, and they're just like, how am I going to read 300 pages? But if you just sit down and play the game, I can teach you in 10 minutes. So there's like a weird disconnect there where you don't actually need to know a whole lot. And you can convey that through visualization and just telling people basically what to do really quickly.
Yeah, and I think we as people that design games, I think the number one thing that people that design games suffer from is playing too many games. And therefore having this very this go-to language of like, oh yeah, you do this and you this, and it can become really inside baseball really fast. And I think speaking plainly, Luca Rayek, I think, Rayetz, has an amazing post where he talks about speaking plainly and like writing things plainly for role-playing games so as not to like obfuscate things for no reason. Like you want things to be really welcoming to new people in the hobby because that's how a hobby flourishes. And that's where you have the most fun, I think, is by pulling in new people from different areas. I think you can get really bogged down playing with like recycling the same sort of group of people over and over again. I like want more people from like outside of games to play games because, you know, it's, I don't know, that makes more sense to me.
Yeah, well, and it's almost a truism at this point that brand new players to D&D are the best players, where they come in with no preconceived notions, they don't know how the rules work, and they instinctively treat the world like it's real. And that's so much more fun than players who are just like, what is the mechanic that lets me pick up this rock?
I talk about this a lot on my Twitch stream because I get a lot of like 5th edition players and Pathfinder players that sort of roll in because that's the most popular thing, and they're just like, oh, you know, is this I do a Patreon where I draw characters, and on Friday mornings I live stream it, and so people come in and be like, oh, is this character for 5th edition? I'm like, well, it's sort of system agnostic, like it's got 6 stats, you can sort of put it wherever you want. And you're like, oh, but is it like this kind of thing or is it this kind of thing? It's like, well, it's whatever you want it to be. It's not a big deal. Like it's meant to be, you know, sort of liquid. And I think after a very long discussion with somebody one day, I realized that there are some people that really like the game of building a character mechanically in one of those systems, because it is a game. It's like doing your taxes. There's a great quote. It's Tim Rogers, who's like a great he writes and like does videos about video games for Kotaku and some other stuff. But he described a video game once. It's like doing your taxes on the moon. And I always really thought that was a good way of describing like sort of the D&D paperwork. Yeah. Because it's like, it's all very like obscure rulings and things like that. You have to ask, you know, your DM, like, what is this? It's like, oh, it's over here. You wouldn't know this though, because no one's ever written one of these books, right? Like, yeah. I'm still looking for that perfect cookbook. Like I honestly, like of all the books in my house, the closest one to a good player's guide is my Betty Crocker cookbook. Like, oh yeah. Everything can come out and everything's listed as in steps, and yeah, I don't know. It blows my mind that we don't have that at that level yet. For someone like Hasbro that is like a game company, like, you know, you'd think that they'd do more stuff like that, but yeah.
Well, I mean, like that cookbook sense of design where it's all just focused on usability would require an enormous amount of art and layout, right? Yeah. Like, and I think that's the hurdle for most people. Like, Hasbro doesn't have just one guy that's just like create a vision of how all these pages are going to be laid out, make it all consistent. They're trying to pull in from lots of different places. There's no coherent vision really. So you just get a kind of scattershot product as a result. Yeah.
I mean, that's what you get. I think anytime you have, you know, a company is that big. So anytime it's moving in any sort of good direction, I get excited because it's like, you don't understand how hard it is to get something this big to do anything. It's like watching Twitch play Pokemon. It's just like any small achievement is a huge achievement.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Break before. I'll put links to Break down below.
Oh, absolutely. Link to Break forever.
It's crazy. So people who haven't seen Break, it's mind-blowing. So it's been in production since the dawn of time, and it's going to come out sometime around the apocalypse. But each page is absolutely phenomenal, and just in terms of layout, and everything is visual. There's like flow charts. Everything's like color coded. It's amazing. Everything just like slots together.
Oh, it is. It's a dream for anybody that's ever had their eyes glaze over reading about hit dice. Break is the book for you. Like, it is so beautiful, and it's gonna be it's just such a labor of love. Like, they just love what they're making, and I've play tested it a couple of times now, and it's like it's delicious. I can't talk about that game enough.
I have never played it. I just looked at all the pictures and drool. It's so good, and it takes forever. They've been writing it for years, and that's why.
They want it to be perfect, and it's
they want it to be perfect.
Yeah, it will come. Yeah, it'll come riding in on the back of like some ancient beast. Yeah, that brings about that eats the sun and screams at the moon. I don't know. It's late.
So we're at about time. Anything else you want to pitch? Where can people find you if they want to look at your stuff or they want to hire you?
If they want, you can always find me on Twitter. I'm everywhere at better_legends. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter. Just betterlegends.com is my portfolio website. You can email me through there. You can find me on Patreon at better_legends. That's the main stuff. I have in-print stores and all the links to that though are on my website. So, and the Kickstarter is 10 People You Meet in the Undergarden by me and Carrie Eldridge, my wife.
Fantastic. All links to that are going to be down there. Go down into the dungeon of the description and click on all those links. Thanks for joining us, Sam. It's been great.
Thanks for having me.
And everyone go to Zine Quest, look at all of those zines and back some of them. There you have so many to choose from. You'll find something you love.
Life is short. Buy a lot of zines.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks. See you next time.